Scary telling.
I still get chills down my spine when I recall what happened that day. It was supposed to be just a regular day of shopping with my boyfriend, but it turned out to be anything but that. We were out running errands, and we decided to stop by a small boutique in a strip mall. We had never been there before, but we thought it would be fun to check it out. As we entered the store, we were greeted by a friendly salesperson who directed us to the section we were looking for. We browsed through the clothes and picked out a few items, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt thick and heavy, and there was an eerie silence that seemed to permeate the store. We brushed it off as our imagination and continued shopping. But then something strange happened. When we checked our watches, we realized that 4 hours had passed. 4 hours. We had only been inside the store for half an hour. We were confused and disoriented. It felt like we had been transported to another dimension or lost in time. We tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe we had lost track of time, or our watches were malfunctioning. But deep down, we knew that something paranormal had occurred. We were trapped in a time warp, and we couldn't explain it. As we left the store, we noticed that the world outside looked different. The sky was darker, the trees were bare, and there was a stillness in the air that made us uneasy. It was like we had stepped into an alternate reality where time moved differently. We walked around the strip mall, hoping that things would return to normal. But they didn't. We were lost in time, and there was no way out. The longer we stayed in this strange world, the more we realized that it wasn't just a simple time warp. There were dark forces at play, and they were determined to keep us trapped in this alternate reality. We tried to communicate with the people around us, but they were unresponsive. It was like they were frozen in time, and we were the only ones who were still alive. We were terrified and alone, with no idea of how to escape this nightmare. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. We were stuck in this alternate reality, unable to escape. We tried everything we could think of, but nothing worked. It was like we were being punished for entering that small boutique. It was a place of evil, a place where time stood still, and there was no escape. One day, after what felt like an eternity, we woke up in our own bed. We were back in our own reality, with no memory of how we got there. It was like we had been released from a spell, and we were finally free. But the experience had changed us forever. We knew that the world was not as it seemed, and that there were dark forces at play that we could not comprehend. From that day forward, we made a promise to each other to never enter a small boutique in a strip mall again. We had survived the horror of being lost in time, and we knew that we were lucky to make it out alive. But the memories of that alternate reality haunted us, and we knew that we could never forget what had happened to us. I always believed that ghosts were just a myth, something that people made up to scare each other around campfires. That was until I went to Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. What was supposed to be a simple class trip turned into a nightmare that I will never forget. It all started when my aunt asked me to spread some of my uncle's ashes at the causeway. My uncle had always wanted to visit Ireland, but he never got the chance to. So my aunt thought it would be fitting if his ashes were scattered there. I was happy to do it for her. When we arrived at the causeway, I immediately started looking for the perfect spot to scatter the ashes. I wanted it to be a place that was special and had a connection to my uncle. I found the perfect area overlooking the sea, and my friends made a barrier around me as I gave a couple of taps to the necklace and screwed the cap back on. But as soon as I turned around, something strange happened. A rainbow appeared over the sea, which hadn't been there just a few seconds before. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but then I remembered that my uncle had always been fascinated with rainbows. It was like he was sending me a sign that he was there with me. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I should have. That rainbow was the beginning of a haunting that would terrorize me for the rest of the trip. As we continued to explore the causeway, strange things started to happen. We would hear footsteps behind us, but when we turned around, no one was there. We would see shadows moving in the corners of our eyes, but when we looked directly at them, they vanished. At night, things got even worse. We would hear whispers and moans coming from the darkness, and we could feel a presence in the room with us. It was like something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the scariest thing happened on the last night of our trip. I woke up in the middle of the night to see a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was my uncle, but he looked different. His eyes were black, and his skin was pale. He was staring at me with a look of hatred that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed with fear. I watched as my uncle slowly disappeared, but I could still feel his presence in the room with me. The next day, I left Ireland, never to return again. But the haunting followed me home. I would see my uncle's figure out of the corner of my eye, and I would hear his whispers in my ear. It was like he was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand what it was. Years have passed, and the haunting has become a part of my life. I don't know what my uncle wants from me, but I know that I will never forget the terror I experienced at Giant's Causeway. It was a haunting that changed me forever, and I know that I will never be the same again. I used to think my dreams were just that, dreams. But then, strange things started to happen. Whenever someone died in one of my dreams, they would be absent from school the next day. It was like my dreams had become reality, and it was starting to freak me out. At first, I tried to brush it off as a coincidence. Maybe the people who were absent were actually sick, or just running late. But as it happened more and more, I couldn't ignore the pattern. Then one night, I had a dream about my best friend, Emily. In the dream, we were hanging out at her house when suddenly she collapsed on the floor. I remember feeling a sense of panic and dread as I watched her convulse and gasp for air. The next day at school, Emily was absent. I tried calling her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I even went to her house after school to check on her, but her parents told me she had been rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. She had suffered from a severe asthma attack and was still in critical condition. I couldn't believe it. Had my dream somehow predicted what was going to happen to Emily? Was I some kind of psychic or medium? I didn't know what to think. As the weeks went on, I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Every night, my dreams became more vivid and intense. I would wake up in the morning feeling exhausted and drained, like I had been living another life while I slept. And then, something even stranger happened. One night, I had a dream about a girl I had never met before. In the dream, she was running down a dark alley, chased by a shadowy figure. I watched as she stumbled and fell, her screams echoing in my ears. The next day at school, I saw the same girl in the hallway. She looked just like she did in my dream, down to the same clothes and hairstyle. I tried to talk to her, but she ignored me and walked away. From that point on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I started to see things out of the corner of my eye, like shadows moving in the dark or faces watching me from the windows. One night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall and thin, with long arms and legs that seemed to stretch on forever. Its face was obscured by darkness, but I could feel its eyes watching me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear as the figure leaned closer and closer, its breath hot and rank on my face. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. I was alone in my room, drenched in sweat and trembling with fear. I knew then that my dreams were no longer just dreams. They had become something else, something darker and more sinister. I didn't know how to stop them, or if they could even be stopped. All I knew was that the line between reality and fantasy had been blurred, and I was trapped in the middle of it. The dreams that had once been a harmless curiosity had become a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I never believed in ghosts until that night. My boyfriend's house was a small and cozy one, perfect for sheltering from the storm that raged outside. But little did I know that the warmth of the house couldn't protect me from the icy touch of fear that awaited me. As my boyfriend settled down on the sofa, I was led to his room, which was freezing cold despite the fact that the heating was on. But I was tired, so I quickly drifted off to sleep. However, I was soon awakened by the sound of footsteps on the stairs outside the door. I assumed it was my boyfriend coming to join me, so I hid under the blanket to scare him. But what happened next was beyond terrifying. I heard the doorknob turn, and the door creaked open. Then, I felt something or someone's presence in the room. I held my breath, waiting for my boyfriend to jump out and surprise me, but instead, I was met with a dark figure with glowing red eyes. I screamed and scrambled back, trying to get as far away as possible. But the figure kept advancing towards me, its eyes piercing through the darkness. It wasn't until my boyfriend came upstairs, and the lights were switched on that the figure vanished into thin air. But the fear didn't end there. As I tried to explain what I saw, everyone thought I was having a nightmare, but I knew what I saw was real. From that night on, strange things began happening in the house. Doors would slam shut, and the lights would flicker on and off at random. But the worst was yet to come. One night, my boyfriend and I were watching TV when we heard a strange noise from upstairs. It sounded like someone was walking around in his room, but we knew no one was there. We cautiously went upstairs, but as soon as we stepped into his room, we were hit with an overwhelming feeling of dread. The air was icy, and the room was darker than it should have been, despite the streetlights outside. Suddenly, we heard a raspy voice whispering in our ears, and a cold hand brushed against the back of our necks. We spun around to find ourselves face to face with the dark mass with glowing red eyes again. This time, it was more solid and menacing than before. It seemed to be trying to communicate something, but the words were incomprehensible. We ran out of the room as fast as we could, but the figure followed us, haunting us with its presence. We tried to ignore it, but it seemed to be getting stronger with each passing day. Finally, we decided to bring in a paranormal investigator who confirmed our worst fears. The house was built on an ancient burial ground, and the dark figure was the vengeful spirit of a long-dead native. We had unknowingly disturbed his final resting place, and now he was seeking revenge. We moved out of the house, but the experience has stayed with me ever since. I learned that some things are better left alone, and the past should never be disturbed. The memories of that night still haunt me, and I'm forever changed by what I saw and felt. I have always been an avid reader, and I make it a habit to read before going to bed. But one strange night, something happened that I couldn't explain. As usual, I finished reading, set my book on the nightstand, and placed my glasses on top. I turned off the lamp and closed my eyes, ready for a good night's sleep. However, the next morning, when I reached for my glasses, they were gone. I searched everywhere in my apartment, but they were nowhere to be found. I couldn't remember taking them off or placing them anywhere else, but I assumed I must have misplaced them. Since I couldn't go without glasses, my parents came over and we searched every inch of my apartment. We checked under the bed, behind the furniture, in the bathroom, and even in the kitchen, but the glasses were nowhere to be found. I had to get a new pair, which was quite an inconvenience and expense. Months passed, and I had long forgotten about the incident. One night, after finishing my book, I set my glasses on top and went to sleep. But when I woke up the next morning, I was shocked to see both my old and new pairs of glasses sitting on top of the book I'd been reading. I was confused and terrified. How did my old glasses reappear when they were lost for months? And how did they end up next to my new pair? I couldn't explain it. I tried to brush it off and thought maybe I was sleepwalking or had a weird dream. But as time passed, more strange occurrences started happening. Sometimes I would hear strange noises at night, like footsteps or whispers. I would also find things moved or misplaced in my apartment, like my keys or phone. I thought maybe it was just my imagination or that I was forgetful. But then, one night, I woke up to find my book floating in midair. I was frozen in fear and couldn't move. Suddenly, the book slammed down onto the nightstand, making a loud noise that echoed through the room. I couldn't ignore the strange happenings anymore. I knew something was in my apartment, and I needed to find out what it was. I decided to set up a camera to see if I could capture anything strange. That night, I went to bed, nervous and anxious about what the camera might capture. When I woke up the next morning, I immediately checked the footage. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but then I saw it. A dark figure, barely visible, but unmistakable, was standing next to my bed. It was hard to make out, but it seemed to be holding something. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I watched the footage over and over, trying to make sense of it, but I couldn't. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know where to go. I didn't have any family or close friends nearby, and I couldn't afford to move out. So, I decided to confront the entity. I gathered my courage and prepared for the worst. That night, I set up the camera again and went to bed. I closed my eyes, and after a while, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps. I opened my eyes, and there it was, the dark figure, standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move or speak, and I was trembling with fear. But then, something strange happened. The figure reached out its hand and placed my glasses on the nightstand. It didn't say anything, but it seemed to be telling me something. After that night, the strange occurrences stopped. I never saw the figure again, and I never found out what it was or what it wanted. But I knew one thing for sure, it was trying to communicate with me. I don't know if it was a ghost, a spirit, or something else entirely, but it was clear that it had a message for me. And that message was that it had taken my glasses for a reason, and it had returned them for a reason. I still think about that night often, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't confronted the entity. Would it have continued to haunt me? Would it have harmed me in some way? I will never know for sure, but what I do know is that I am grateful for the experience. It taught me that sometimes the scariest things can also be the most enlightening. As I sit here, writing this story, I can't help but feel a strange presence in the room. I don't know if it's the entity or just my imagination, but I can feel its presence. And as I look down at my glasses, sitting on the desk in front of me, I can't help but wonder what message it's trying to convey to me this time.